did you think?
I kind of skimmed through because I saw you posted it too, right? Um, so I didn't like read the whole thing, but yeah, it's just that there's so much of the fear mongering. I know you say what FUD, and just I really respect that she tried to like pin down where that number came from. Like 30% lose a tooth in
Yep.
5 years. Is that?
In 5 years.
Yeah.
I
Because
watched,
stuff like
I
that
wa-
goes on all the time. Like
all the time.
people making claims and no one really calls them out. So what do you think? I mean,
Yeah, I thought it was great. And I actually watched that documentary because I have Tamsin coming up on my podcast. And that definitely, it's weird when you hear something like that. And you can't question like literally everything, or you just couldn't go about
yeah.
your day. But I remember thinking, really? And then I actually spent a little time thinking about it because I know two people. My best friend is having a lot of trouble with her teeth, and she said it's genetic. And I know someone in Dubai who just got all her teeth pulled. But also she said she has a genetic problem. She got them all pulled. And
Wow.
but those are the only two people I know who are having this problem. And I just thought it was high. 30% within 5 years. That's just so many people. But at the same time, Tamsin just posted a clip where she was going on the Sherry show, and Sherry came to see her in the green room, and she was talking about losing a tooth. So I think it's just so important. We can't track all these things down, but it's just important when you hear it. There's so many examples of this. Like, I'll just give a few. So Rachel Lancaster, who runs the platform Magnificent Midlife, did this
Mhm.
awesome look into another stat that didn't seem right to me. And it was published everywhere in the UK. And it was, 900,000 women a year are leaving the workforce due to menopause. And I just remember thinking, that's an astronomical number. How did they arrive at that figure? And it just took Rachel getting as obsessed as Dr. Gunter and just trying to get to the bottom of it. And it came from a very small study from Bupa, like so small. And it was just some editor who thinks he's good at math, probably some pompous guy. I've worked with them, just like extrapolating. And it was just based on nothing, and
Mhm.
repeated and repeated and repeated. And because everyone just takes what was said and repeats it and repeats it. This is the problem. It just gets like blown up.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
another thing that's crazy is that the 34 symptoms of menopause,
mhm.
like Andrea Donsky, who's a co-founder of Morphus, is writing a book. She's a menopause educator. She has tracked menopause symptoms and clocked 103 and published that along with some other research in the Menopause Society Journal in December. And she looked into the 34, and it's from this tiny little thing in a journal, and just amplified and amplified and amplified. And
Mhm.
it's always the scary stuff, right? Like, it seems right, I guess. And I just don't know what to do about it. You can't make people be more careful.
Well,
I don't
I
know.
think one of the problems, well, this also happens with, I think, of bone health. I don't know if you've heard that you have to have estrogen of 60 for bone health. And I kept hearing this and I looked it up in there. I think it was like a study in the 90s with really small study based on this. And it's like, so everyone's talking about this like common knowledge and it's based on this one small study. Um, and I mean, there's some other studies with estrogen levels. There's not a lot, but it's just I don't know. Like it also reminds me of the water. For years and years, people said drink 8-ounce glasses a day, which isn't bad. I mean, but and then this guy did a review and found there's no studies. That was
Yeah.
when was that? Like in the 2000s, that we had no studies, and everyone gave that advice. Like
Okay, it was sooner than that because that's when I started working in journalism, and I went from being a waitress and walking around to like
mhm,
sitting more, and I gained weight. And around that time they came out with the 8 glasses of water a day. I've never taken anything more seriously. I That's when I started drinking astronomical amounts of water. It's
mhm,
also when bottled water came out, like Evian and all the like. So
yeah,
I personally think that it was like, if I had time, I would love to track this down, but I would bet some of my Bitcoin that one of those bottled water companies got a doctor to say it, and that's where it came from.
yeah.
That's like, you pay a doctor. I mean, this happens all the time. So when you track these down so many times, they don't even happen. And
Yeah.
speaking of bone health, I saw something so outrageous on Instagram this week, but I don't even know what to do about it. And it was a doctor who posted like a sort of a with music like carousel. And she put the amount of estrogen that a postmenopausal age man has, like a man, the
Hmm.
age, and said this is enough to support his brains and bones. Then the next slide was this is the amount of estrogen that a postmenopausal woman has. It's not enough to support her brains and bones. And I was
Yeah.
like, what? So set aside, so whoever designed this incredible system just messed up with like half of this. Like I know that it's complicated and there's nuance, but to say that doesn't support your brains and bones, I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, it's like, so that's a big thing now. Like men have more estrogen than
Yeah.
postmenopausal women, and it's like supposed to make us feel like we're not women or whatever. But the problem is like our estrogen, we're going to build our uterine lining. So our body, the way it's designed post menopause, it keeps like our blood levels low. And I mean, sometimes it can go high, and that's you don't want that. But in the cell, that doesn't tell you what's going on in the cell. And like
No.
the intrachronology, like our body does make estrogen in the cell, but then it doesn't release it back in the circulation because if it did, then our uterine line, you know what I mean? So there's a
Yeah.
reason why women have postmenopause lower blood levels of estrogen. That doesn't tell you what's going on in the cell. So, and I'm not saying we're making a ton of estrogen. Like I'm sure it's different, and that's probably part of the reason why some women have more symptoms than others. So, but no one ever talks about that. And men don't have a uterus, and it's not like their estrogens usually. I think it's 20 to 40 is kind of normal for them, and women are under 20 postmenopause. So yeah, I don't know, it's just there's so much left out of it, and women just like see that and they like freak out, and like I
It's
don't know,
it
it's
to
just it's not
me.
helpful. Yeah.
No, it's very simplistic. You have
Yeah.
a doctor who doesn't seem to understand how what happens to estrogen in our bodies and thinks that you can measure it in the blood and that will tell you the whole story. And then everyone's hanging off that doctor's every word while they're
Mhm.
rapping and doing whatever else and making I don't I don't get it. Like I don't get how they don't know it. I don't know what you're supposed to say. It's just like it's in your tissues, it's in your cells, it's in
Yeah, and if you make too much, like that's a problem too. I mean, I don't know, it's just,
yeah. The whole
you know.
system's wonky, right? Because you have all these doctors testing levels and then saying, we'll get you up. I just met someone last week and she's in perimenopause and she said, I just can't get my estrogen levels up. We keep testing and testing. And she's like really forward thinking. And I just get so confused because I'm like, what
Yeah.
are you?
And maybe they need to do some studies. There really isn't any good studies, but maybe they should do a study where they monitor levels. I don't know. Like just because so many people make these claims, I don't know. Like they
Yeah.
need to do something to like figure that out. Like if there is anything related to estrogen levels and benefits, that women taking
Yeah.
hormone therapy in different levels, and like I'm sure they'll find maybe they don't do as well, maybe they do. I don't know. Like I
And
don't know
just
why they don't.
facts about
No.
postmenopause that it's not just in your blood. Like you make estrogen in other places. So and then just to say that's enough to support you, that's not enough to support you.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. I mean, I know sometimes it's not enough, but it's complicated and due to a whole bunch of other factors. I mean, I was speaking to a evolutionary geneticist. She's coming up on the podcast. And she was talking about a Mayan study in her book where women had lost in the Yucatan. So these are sort of like off the grid as you can get
Mhm.
women, like as far away from us as you can get. And they lost bone density, but they didn't have any fractures because they were so nimble and active. So even when people talk about the bone density loss that we experience, it doesn't automatically equate to breaks and fractures.
Yeah, and not only that, but I don't know if you saw that post that I did. There's a study like I ran across, and I'm obsessed with it. It was 2007 where they had women do squats and deadlifts twice a week.
Oh yeah.
And in the spine, those women maintain their bone mass and they were early menopause. So you lose the most bone like a year before, and I think 2 years, that 3 year period, 2 years after. And then they had a group of just HRT, and then HRT with doing the weights, and then a control. And the women doing the weights they gained a little bit of bone mass during that time. The HRT lost a little bit. HRT plus weights, gained a little bit more than the women that just did weights. But I thought, wow, that's really compelling. Like, why didn't we follow up, do a follow up study, and then we could get a protocol to help women maybe maintain bone mass through, it's just 2 exercises twice a week. It's, I don't know. I just like, I think there's so much more, that women can do to maintain their bone mass. And
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, the other thing, like, this is one thing that I never see anywhere, and I always doubt myself on it, but I know I've seen a study, and it was okay. The most recent one is in 2023, but it looks at women who have used hormone therapy and their bone loss, and women who haven't used hormone therapy and their bone loss. So it's like within a 5-year period, they went on the hormone therapy and then they went off, and they compared the bone mass to those who were never on it. And when you go on hormone therapy and then you go off, your bone loss accelerates beyond the never users.
Yeah. I think I remember you talking about that.
Yeah. And I'm obsessed with it just because you never hear about it. It's just like, go on it. And I don't know. Did I mention that before to you? Have I?
No, not really to me. I think I read it in something you wrote.
It just fascinates me because that's interesting, right? Like, it's like, it's presented like you absolutely have to be on it. And then the conclusion, or the conclusion was, next up, we should study how weight training mitigates that accelerated bone loss if you go off hormone therapy. And I thought that was funny. Like, it's just a funny thing to study next, right? Like, well,
yeah. Well, yeah. Well, there's the Lift More studies, but that's with 65 and up. And she's seen, like, who is it? Melinda Beck, these women with low bone mass, like, gain bone mass because they're doing, they're supervised. So you have to be supervised, but they're doing the same. It's kind of like that 2007 study. They're doing squats, deadlift, and their overhead press, and like some kind of jumping. And what she has found as a researcher was they were so afraid to hurt women, so they would just do these like light weights, you know what I mean? But they gave women these heavier weights, supervised. I'm sure they and they saw them gain bone mass. These women with, osteopenia, osteoporosis, that's 65 plus. So we have this 2007 study. It's kind of similar. I just think there's a lot to that, and it's the same exercises. It's the squat with the barbell and the deadlift. And there's, it's like kind of an even distribution of weight. So like your spine and the hip is a little bit, you don't see as much results, but they definitely helps. So yeah, I don't know. It's just like really interesting, because if you go on hormone therapy, which is, I probably would if I have my bone mass is good, but women may not stay on it so like you said, like, then what do? I just.
Well, I mentioned this to someone. I was on her podcast. She's a fitness coach and a very fit person. And I said this to her, and she said, well, why would you ever go off of it? I was like, okay, well, that's fine. I mean,
they may not go off it. They may stay on it, but some women may just want to, or they,
all the reasons, all the things, all the ways that. I think, I think it's going to be so different in the future what is constitutes hormone therapy. Like I just covered a little study this weekend in my newsletter. Let me hope I can remember it. Was it looking at anti-aging? And, again, estrogen always gets all the attention when it comes to like hormones that you might put on your face. And they
Mhm.
actually found that melatonin, I guess in a form of a cream or something, was more effective. And it always makes me crazy when people talk about hormone therapy. It always has to include estrogen. And I just feel like that was just like another little sign to me that the narrowness of the question is just leaving
Mhm.
out a whole bunch of options for people.
Yeah, and it's also too like you mentioned about the oral health. Like sometimes when we go through menopause, it's a trigger, and like dry mouth, what is it? A burning mouth syndrome. They
Yeah.
find like B vitamins, B12. So sometimes menopause can trigger these nutrient deficiencies. And it may not necessarily be that a woman needs estrogen, but it could be that she's, needs B vitamins or, so
Yeah.
I think that happens a lot. It's kind of like a trigger. And yes, you can add estrogen and that can work well for some women, but it can be, something else that you can do. And I think we're not really doing that or looking at that in the research enough.
Yeah. And I know I was at a bioidentical dentist and I was asking him and the hygienist, and they were saying like women our age often have a lot of dental problems, bleeding gums, and like stuff like
Hmm.
that. But that also concerns me because when I was really sick with my leaky gut and my thyroid and whatever, my gums were bleeding a lot, and my dentist actually said your gums are in really bad shape. And then I had to go back the next week, and I was so freaked out that my I was talking to Andrea Donsky, who always has the answer for everything, and she said, "Swish coconut oil in your mouth."
Hmm.
And so I did. It was disgusting, but I did it for like 10 minutes a day. And then when I went back the next week, he said, "Oh, they're great." Like in 1 week. And that seems like an old wives' tale, but there's lots of antibacterial. And so now when my gums are bleeding, I'm always like, okay, I think your gut's not that good. Or I always just think it's a sign of something. Like I don't,
Yeah.
this is one of those perimenopause symptoms that I just get a bit nervous when people are like bleeding gums. It's like, okay, well, how much are they bleeding? Like, I don't think,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah.
it's just such a great vulnerability, isn't it? Like
Mhm.
it's just like the things you got away with when you had the full complement of hormones are just like,
I know. It was like being healthy was like was a lot easier, like
yeah,
when you're younger and you just kind of, exercise and
yeah,
intuitively eat,
yeah. Now I have
yeah.
to do a lot of things. I feel um, like I just even have to do things to balance my energy that I'm not sure I did have to do. Although I'd say I'm definitely in like a more calm mood. So that
Mhm.
is to me a huge payoff for some of the other things I have to do to make sure like my hip doesn't hurt or if my neck gets sore or um I don't know, make sure I sleep well, like the
Yeah.
calm mood because I just was always like a very up and down person. So to me it's worth it, but it does feel like there's a lot you have to
Well, yeah,
do.
like before I run, I have to like activate my glutes,
Right.
So I
You
get
know what
up
it is?
early and I'm like doing these, glute activation and
Yeah.
or else I, feel my hamstring but yeah. But it's definitely
Well,
like worth it.
yeah, yeah. And I think just today, last week when I did this panel, there was a doctor and we were talking about energy and she was in the audience and she said, I always close my eyes and just take a little not a nap, I just take a 15-minute rest in the afternoon. And the doctor on the panel said it's really important to close your eyes because that's where a ton of your energy for your brain is coming. So if you just do that, well, today it's Ramadan hours here. I came home. I
Mhm.
wanted to go to the coffee shop and do some more work. I was very, very tired. I felt very tired. So I did it. I thought about her, and instead of pushing and going downstairs and having a double Americano or whatever,
Mhm.
which I eventually did, I laid down for 15 minutes, felt like I was going to fall asleep, then woke up and felt great. And I was like, this kind of thing, the glute activation, this maybe
Mhm.
15 minutes of resting my eyes, this is probably the kind of thing I should have been doing all along,
Mhm.
instead of this balls to the wall thing I did. I would have just got up and started running, like, just put my shoes on and go, right? Just,
Yeah.
I don't know that that was the
Yeah, it's
best
not
way.
like it was good, like but you
No,
could get away with it. And you know what I
right.
mean? So it's
Right.
like especially the stress, like how you handle stress is it's just a huge you just can't do what the things you used to do. And that's not bad. I think
No,
it's actually good because,
no,
you know, what wasn't really quite healthy, you know.
no. And I injured myself all the time. My whole, let's be honest, my whole, I had a plantar fasciitis. I had,
Mhm.
I had sciatica. Like I was young, but I remember having sciatica when I was like a waitress when I was 20. I like to tell myself these things when I feel like I'm getting old,
I
like when
know
I
because
do.
people do that. They'll say, "Oh, I'm getting old. I have." It's like, well, yeah, I've had that. I had that in my
Yeah.
20s. Like, I just don't think it's
Yeah.
a good mindset to be like, I'm getting old and saying that.
Yeah.
I don't.
I agree with you. And I
Yeah.
think that every time you do something that you feel like you're old, just remember when you did it when you were young. Like yesterday, I dried a load of laundry with a very bright orange lip gloss in it and like ruined it. And I was like, what? And then I remember doing that when I was like 18, and anytime I lose something or forget something, that's been happening my whole life. Maybe it's a bit
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. Me too. I'm. I'm still like, yeah. I go in the kitchen and it's like I make a sandwich and it's like this huge mess. And I don't know how I did it. Like my husband's like, "How do you do it?" I'm like, then he comes and cleans after me. But
Oh my God, what
yeah.
a man. I need a man like that. I was cooking, I baked a cake at my brother's house in Canada, and he came home and me and my niece, he was horrified. He was like, what is going on here? And I'm like, we're making a cake. And I guess then I looked through his eyes, it was like a tornado. In my mind, I was like, well, I'm going to clean it up as if I would just walk away. But he just couldn't believe it. He was like, clean as you go. I'm like, you clean as you go. I'll create a giant mess and clean it up later. It's
I know
okay.
people always say that, like, put it in. I just don't do that. I don't like,
That's not fun
I
for
just
me.
have to like, it's kind of how I write too. So I'm working on this piece. I'm hoping to get out
Okay.
today, and it's on heart disease in women. I wanted to do it for Heart Month. And I don't know if this happens to you, but it like just took on a life of its own. And I've written
Yes.
about this before, but it just the more I found is just I couldn't stop. And so it's gonna be late. It's either gonna be today or tomorrow. But I have my colonoscopy, so I'm like it's just really important about how women, this is another thing we can maybe talk about because I don't we might be running out of time, but how women experience heart disease very different. Nobody talks about this. So like, when women go into the emergency room with chest pain, half of them will not have blockages, which is what they check for.
Okay.
So it's called ischemia without obstructive coronary disease. So women tend to more often have problems with their microcirculation,
Okay.
and they're not testing for this. So it's a huge problem, and it's something I'm going to talk about in the article. And it's I don't know. Once I find out all this information, it's like, how can we not be talking to women about this? It's a huge risk factor, and they just came out in 2021 with guidelines to check for this, but a lot of doctors are just not up on it, even cardiologists. So yeah.
So when you go in and you have chest pain, and they will do scans for blockages.
Hmm.
How do they not also test levels of a bunch of different things that would tell them something was going on or no?
They probably do, but I don't know if that won't always show you that you're having a problem with your microcirculation. That the most comprehensive is to do invasive testing, to see if the blood flow is, in the microcirculation to the heart and brain is low, or there's a spasm or something. Um, and it's like women have, like, they did this survey that have this. It took them, they had symptoms up to 10 years before they got a diagnosis. They only 6% were diagnosed at their first cardiologist visit. Um, so it's really associated with high risk of, they call MACE, like a cardiac event, like a heart attack, and it's just completely overlooked. And it's a huge problem. And but they haven't studied women for that long. Like
No.
men are more likely to have the obstructive coronary artery disease, but
Yeah.
women, they've only really started in the last 25 years looking at men and women and how they're different. And our microcirculation, like, we have smaller diameter, so even when you control for size, and so it's just really interesting that no one really is talking about this in the menopause community. Like, I looked it up. I'm like, is you know, Mary Claire Haver, she's not, and I get her newsletter, and there's no mention of how women are different. Like these really people with these big followings, like if they could talk about this, we could get more recognition.
Yeah.
Um, so, it's very under recognized, under researched, and I'm hoping there's no treatments. They're looking at some treatments now. Like, so it's just like, wow, how can this, we've known about this, no one's really talking about it. So I kind
How
of,
would you know if you had it?
so there's certain tests they do. They can do like a PET scan, but the invasive is the most like accurate, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, you just have to ask for it. Like like if you go in and they want to send you home, like 70% of these women were told that it wasn't cardiac, that they had reflux, like, and it may be that sometimes it can be stress, or it could be, but you want to make sure you get like checked out. Because this lady, this was a few years ago, she's a midlife coach, and she posted like, I went into the ER with chest pain and they sent me home, said everything's fine. I just sent her a message. I said, just make sure they check for microvascular disease, coronary, it's called CMD. And she's like, oh, thanks. I don't know if she followed up on it, but I think women need to know this. And it's also like prevention too, because since there are no treatments, so
What would
it's,
you do if you found out that you had that?
I would find a specialist. Like most of these women, there are some specialists out there. Um, yeah. But I think there are certain risk factors too. Like if you, during pregnancy, if you have like high blood pressure, so it can start earlier in life, or
Yeah.
PCOS, they tend to have. Um, so this kind of narrative that it's like menopause, that your risk goes up, which it does, but a lot of times it's starting earlier. And then it's also can be linked to more severe menopause symptoms too. So
Yeah.
not, it'd be nice if doctors, especially menopause doctors, are really aware of this. So they, we just need more awareness, really, is what it is.
If I
There's
had
just
a
not,
Yeah, if I had a complaint about this sort of like awareness that's going on right now, it just seems to be like a repetition of the same sort of like points
hmm
and really simplifying it. And then I know that that's what almost people need because it's so overwhelming, the amount of information, but
yeah.
this stuff doesn't get out. Now, I do know Mary Claire Haver told me something interesting when she was on my podcast where she said she gives women, before she puts them on hormone therapy, I hope I get this right, calcium CT scoring.
So that's the thing. So that's for your that's for your big arteries. Like
Yeah.
that's not going to tell you if you have microvascular disease. So
She's testing it to make sure you don't
coronary
have plaques
calcium.
already. Coronary calcium
Yeah.
CT.
Yeah.
So
So
that's testing to make sure you don't have the plaques already. And if you do have the plaques, you shouldn't go on hormone therapy because it will exacerbate them. That's what she said.
yeah. So the problem, and that's good. That tells you, in your larger arteries if you have plaque, but it doesn't tell you your microvascular. And this is even more interesting. The studies they're doing now, like the free lab, that hormone therapy, especially if you have compromised microvascular function, then it could make things worse depending on how much you're getting. This is
Yeah.
very like infancy study. So it's just like it's an ignored area, and they really need to do more research on how hormone therapy affects the microvascular, not just
Yeah.
the, so it's just very, it's sometimes when I go deeper and deeper, I'm like, how is nobody talking about this?
Yeah.
I don't, it's,
And then you're like, this is a mess.
yeah, like a cardiologist that came on, Jen Gunter, she had, I don't know if you remember the statin, like, Mary Claire Haver said that statins don't work for women. And so like, that was a whole thing on social media. And she didn't mention it either. And I've looked her up. I forget her name. She's a young cardiologist, really pretty. And I saw a talk on YouTube, and she didn't mention it. And I was just like, is anyone talking about this? I don't know. You'll have to
Why
read
don't
the
you just
article.
fight about drugs? Like, just fight about whether drugs work. Because, Jen Gunter is going to defend every drug there is. That's the way, like, she's going to do it. But then it's like, do they even know? Okay, so the other thing I'm obsessed with that no one cares about, Now, I'm not saying no one cares about this. I'm just saying sometimes when we're like, does anyone even
Yeah.
like who's stuff? I think we could start a decentralized science platform devoted to microvessels and women's heart and research.
Yeah.
And then this is the future of healthcare, by the way. It's just really far off. And then you use the blockchain to connect all the researchers who have an interest in it, and you use the
Mhm.
blockchain to fund the research. And then people can buy tokens and they can like
That'd be
vote
awesome.
for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's like, let's just do that.
Yeah. Let's do it. That's the next one. I think I can't see how much time we've been.
We've been here for over a half an hour, but
Okay.
yeah. Anything else you want to talk about?
I
I'm
think
good.
that's it. I'm gonna go
Yeah.
get working on this article. Now I'm warmed up.
Yeah. I'm glad someone else can't help themselves when they start writing. And then it's a weird feeling because you're like, enough. You've spent enough time on this. And it's like, I just need to look up one more thing.
Yeah. I know. That's my downfall. Like I just research and then it's like, and it's kind of like the kitchen. It's a huge mess. And I'm like,
Yeah.
then when I go to add all the references, I'm like, it's, yeah. It's just the
So
way I
important
am.
though. Like we need you. You're so smart. And I know it's frustrating because it's just like, this is so much more complicated, but I think that people who need to know, hopefully will find you.
I think I just ask why a lot. I'm not satisfied. And then it's like,
Yeah.
why, you know?
It's
And so you
important.
just keep going because people are just like, well, these simple explanations just don't work for me. Like I need to understand things for me too. Like if something's wrong with me, I need to really understand it.
Yeah.
Like research it, and so that I can talk to a doctor, or I'm not just
Well,
gonna like, that's just how I am.
I mean, almost everything I ever look into is not what I thought it was. So, I mean, there's a reason, right?
Yeah,
Like there's a reason you're not satisfied because so many times you've looked into it and you're like, oh, okay, that's
yeah,
not what I thought. So
yeah,
it's
for
kind of
sure.
daunting. Anyway,
Yeah,
okay, always good to talk to you
yeah,
in the
you
Midlife
too.
Morning Show.
Have a
Have a
good
good
week.
day.
All
You too. Bye, everyone.
right.
Thanks for joining us. Bye.